A month had already passed since Riella met Hoson and received permission to come to the garden to care for the plants. It had all begun when the Duchess was once brought a batch of flowers in poor condition. While the servants looked on in dismay, Riella confidently offered to revive them. Unbothered by their state, she enthusiastically asked that the plants be given to her. The Duchess considered the request, and Riella promised to return every flower in good condition. Hoson allowed Riella to take the flowers for their recovery, which made the girl extremely happy. But that wasn't all. The servant soon showed her even more flowers in need of care. At every new delivery, Riella gazed at the wilted plants with greedy determination and begged to take them all. Eventually, Riella found herself standing before a mountain of flowers needing restoration. Though glad she had no idea how to transport them, seeing this, the Duchess proposed a better solution. Riella could simply come to the garden and tend to the flowers there. Hoson added that she would be happy to have someone care for the plants, and Riella eagerly agreed, promising to do her best. Then, unexpectedly, Hoson asked Riella for another favour, to help write letters. Riella immediately agreed. The Duchess was pleased. Having someone to handle correspondence would greatly simplify her life. The next morning, Archduke Haun returned to his office after a grueling night at work. Without much thought, he tossed his jacket onto the sofa and began sifting through his letters. Among them was one from Duchess Hoson. He always read her letters immediately, though often they left him confused. From the first few lines, he realized this one was stranger than usual. The letter spoke of a beautiful new tree in the Duchess's garden, a pond with lotus flowers in the greenhouse, kittens, and even crows. None of it made sense, and to Haun it seemed more like poetic nonsense than an actual message. Even the handwriting was unfamiliar. Still, he was certain it came from the Duchess's estate. Haun read on, hoping it was a code. The letter ended with a warm request for him to take care of himself. That gave him pause. Then came the postscript. Hosang's eyesight had deteriorated, so someone else would be writing her letters from now on. Haun realized immediately it wasn't Nia. She wouldn't have even tried to write something like this. But apart from Nia, Haun didn't know anyone else in the Duchess's mansion who might have written it. That same day, the new letter writer, Riella, visited a kind woman known for baking delicious buns. The cook warmly welcomed her and proudly presented her culinary creations. Riella admired the treats, and when the cook suggested she bring some along for tea with the Duchess, she gladly agreed. When Riella arrived, the Duchess greeted her warmly and again asked for help writing a letter. Riella asked if it should be like before, just writing about anything, and Hoson nodded. After enjoying tea together, Riella set to work. She tried to picture the person receiving the letter. Imagining an older man so immersed in writing, she didn't notice when lunchtime arrived. A maid brought black tea and soft buns, and Riella eagerly took a break. The aroma was so tempting that even the Duchess joined her. The maid described each delicacy in detail, and Riella tasted them with delight, feeling like she was eating the food of the gods. In all seriousness, she turned to the cook and asked her to marry her, prompting laughter from everyone. Then she begged to be adopted instead, just to keep eating the treats. Hoson and Nia chuckled, watching Riella's endless energy. That evening, Archduke Haun visited one of his military camps to assess the situation. While discussing matters, he received another letter from Duchess Hoson. His subordinates remarked on how frequently she wrote to him lately. Haun quietly took the letter and retreated to his tent, where he made himself comfortable and opened it. This letter described delicious cheese buns recently baked at the Duchess's mansion. Reading about such peaceful domestic life made Haun smile. It felt worlds apart from the front lines. That night, he fell asleep early, and his assistant quietly made sure no one disturbed him. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the Duchess called for her assistant to help her to bed. Naya came immediately. Behind them, two maids whispered about Hosang's worsening health. The next morning brought a flurry of activity in the kitchen. Everyone praised Madame Melda's baking. The same buns Riella had adored. Despite the compliments, Melda remained humble, hoping only that the Duchess would enjoy the food. Many noticed that Hasan had become cheerier thanks to Riella's presence. Yet beneath the surface there was unspoken concern. The Duchess's time was running short. Everyone feared that if she passed without an heir, the mansion would fall prey to the greedy stonemancers. The Duchess, aware of her fading strength, felt protective of Riella and didn't want her entangled in future conflict. One night, Hosang suddenly woke. Nia, who was nearby, noticed right away. The Duchess asked if anything had happened, but all was quiet. Nia shared that Riella was doing well with the flowers and a letter had arrived from Han. Hosang asked for it to be brought and for the lights to be brightened, but Nia hesitated, explaining the lamp was already as bright as ever. The Duchess understood. Her eyesight was nearly gone. She smiled gently, accepting what was to come. Nia began reading the letter aloud, but soon suspected it wasn't written by Han. Still, she read on, adding her own sarcastic commentary. Han had written that he hoped to return to the capital soon and that he wished the Duchess well. Nia pouted at his early return, but Hosang only chuckled. Then the old woman wondered aloud, what if she changed her will? Nia lit up, begging her not to let Han inherit anything, just to see his shocked expression. The Duchess didn't promise anything, but drifted into memories of Han's childhood. She remembered how he used to cry in frustration when he couldn't win their sword fights, vowing to grow stronger. Eventually he disappeared from the mansion, dedicating himself to becoming powerful. The Duchess hadn't seen him for years. She missed him, though she couldn't change who he had become. Only she truly understood the reason behind his tireless effort. Now, lying in bed, the Duchess knew her final lesson for Han would be the most important. She summoned Nia and asked her to call the lawyers. It was time to make a will. She also requested that Riella not be invited to the mansion for a month while the legal affairs were handled. The next morning, Riella waited anxiously at the gate. She hadn't been allowed in the mansion for a month. She remembered the day Nia came and gently told her she could only visit the greenhouse for now. Riella had worried she'd done something wrong, but Nia couldn't explain, though Riella guessed the truth. Her days without the Duchess were quiet and dull. Eventually she learned from another gardener that Hosang had been meeting with lawyers and allowing no one inside. A few weeks later, the summons finally came. When Riella entered, she was startled by the Duchess's condition. Hosang greeted her with a weak smile, glad to see her. Her eyesight was nearly gone now. She could only tell Riella was crying by the sound of her voice. The girl wept openly, heartbroken to see the once strong woman so frail. Riella eventually calmed down and apologized to the Duchess for her outburst, explaining that she hadn't meant to cry. In response, Hosang also apologized, realizing how worried the girl must have been during the long silence. With a soft smile, she invited Riella to spend as much time with her as possible. The girl agreed at once. Nia, who had been quietly watching from the side, remained silent but looked visibly saddened. Soon after, Riella was given a room in the mansion, not far from the Duchess's own chambers. Though she worried that her presence might be a burden, her desire to be close to Hosang outweighed her concerns. She decided to stay. While Riella sipped her tea, the Duchess continued her work with the lawyers, avoiding contact with anyone else for the time being. Watching the endless discussions, Riella concluded that lawyers were unbearable and hoped never to deal with them herself. The lawyers, for their part, assured her they had no desire to exhaust the Duchess, but they had little choice. That evening, Hosang invited Riella for another conversation and began sharing stories from her past. Riella listened attentively. When the Duchess struggled to recall where they'd left off last time, she began to guess. Riella playfully pretended to be offended, but quickly reassured her, not wanting to cause worry. Hosang was genuinely surprised by the girl's teasing, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. And her smile, rare and sincere, revealed how much she appreciated it. Encouraged, Riella began to share a story of her own. It wasn't about dragons or magic stones like Hosang's usual tales, but the Duchess enjoyed it all the same. Over time, Riella learned that in her youth, Hosang had been quite headstrong, stubborn to a fault according to her stories. If she wanted to step onto land she didn't own, she'd simply buy it. It shocked newcomers, but her servants were used to it. Through such means, she had greatly expanded her family's inherited lands. Riella found these stories far more interesting than her own, though she never said so aloud. One evening, Riella noticed how late it had gotten and stood to leave. When the Duchess didn't stop her, she smiled and wished the older woman good night, offering to clear the teacups herself. But instead of the usual farewell, Hosang gently told her to rest well. That night, Riella lay in bed, feeling a strange melancholy and anxiety she couldn't explain. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the Duchess, but she tried not to dwell on it. The next morning, Riella overslept. She rushed to get dressed and was still adjusting her clothes when Nia entered, dressed entirely in black. She calmly announced that the Duchess had passed away. Riella froze. The words didn't register. She couldn't speak or process anything else Nia said, lost in a blur of memories. To bring her back to reality, Nia took her hands and told her she was required to be present for the reading of the will. Still overwhelmed, Riella barely understood what was happening. Nia then handed her the Duchess's bracelet, saying it would protect her from most magical threats. But Riella couldn't take in the meaning. She felt like she was suffocating, yet unable to help herself. Nia understood. She didn't press her further. She knew the girl simply needed time. The night before, sensing her end was near, the Duchess had spoken of Riella with deep concern. She also sighed about Han, knowing he would be angry about her will, but she had no plans to change it. Instead, she turned her attention to Nia. Hosang said quietly that having Nia by her side all these years was the best decision she had ever made in her long, turbulent life. Nia, unable to hold back any longer, wept silently. She took her mistress's hand, treasuring the warmth one last time, and cried for the woman who had meant so much to her. Now, the emotional storm had passed, and Nia was composed again, ready for what came next. As she and Riella walked through the hall, Nia gave quiet instructions, aware of how the girl's life was about to change. When they entered the main hall, Nia told Riella to trust the Duchess no matter what happened. But Riella wasn't frightened by her words. What unsettled her was the way the people, seeing her for the first time, began whispering in disapproval. Soon the lawyers arrived, and the atmosphere shifted as everyone turned their attention to them. The notary, who was to read out the Duchess's will, asked for everyone's focus before proceeding. Once he had confirmation, he began reading slowly, following all the proper protocols. As the notary read, Riella's mind wandered. She wondered how much longer she needed to stay, feeling out of place. The elderly man followed the rules meticulously, reading each word carefully, which only seemed to heighten the anticipation in the room. The guests, aware of the Duchess's vast wealth, anxiously waited, hoping to receive even a portion of it. Amid the proceedings, Riella's thoughts kept drifting to the Duchess, and a wave of sadness washed over her. She struggled to hide it, wishing to remain composed. As the notary reached the financial details, Riella could hardly focus her thoughts elsewhere. Just as she was about to leave, Nia gently grabbed her hand, asking her to stay. Reluctantly, Riella returned to her seat, still feeling disconnected. Then the notary announced that the Duchess had bequeathed all her property to one person. A stir rippled through the room. The guests were shocked. None of them had anticipated such an outcome. The whispers started almost immediately, everyone hoping the inheritance would be theirs and not someone else's. The notary tried to quiet the room, but the excitement was palpable. When the noise finally died down, he continued, revealing that the entire inheritance was to go to Riella. Riella froze. A deep fear gripped her. Surely there had been a mistake. As the people around her began to murmur indignantly, some questioning how someone like her could be the sole beneficiary, Riella's heart raced. One man even started a rumor, claiming that the stones were meant for Archduke Haun, not Riella. In the chaos, Riella remained silent, hidden in her own fear, grateful that no one seemed to notice her too closely. But then, one of the men recognized the bracelet Riella was wearing. The same arm-felt pearls that had belonged to the Duchess. He called out, and everyone turned to look. The loudest of the voices from earlier immediately demanded to know where Riella had gotten the bracelet. It became clear that she was indeed the one who had inherited everything. People started whispering and eyeing her suspiciously. Nia quickly came to Riella's side, hugging her and urging her to ignore the crowd. With a sharp glare, Nia silenced the room, and everyone instinctively stepped back, unnerved by her intensity. One man huffed in displeasure, but soon turned away. Meanwhile, in the mansion of Archduke Haun, the servants were in turmoil. They had been searching for their master, worried about his well-being. Haun's youngest assistant was nearly in tears, asking if the master was truly alive. Others, accustomed to his long absences, grumbled at the fuss. Just as they were about to spiral into panic, the door opened, and Archduke Haun entered, unbothered. He explained that he had left a note, but the servants were still concerned, especially since he had been in the dragon's lair, a place known for being dangerous. Seated at the table, Haun was handed a pile of letters, and upon reading one, he learned that the Duchess had passed away 4 days earlier. He was shocked, especially since he had expected to see her again. The letters also revealed that all of her property was to be inherited by a girl named Riella, a name he hadn't heard before. Intrigued, he decided to find out who she was and why everything had gone to her. The next morning, Nia knocked on Riella's door. When she received no response, she entered. Riella had a busy day ahead, and Nia had hoped to wake her early. As she approached the bed, she heard Riella whispering the Duchess's name in her sleep, tears slipping down her face. Nia, feeling a pang of sadness herself, hesitated for a moment, missing the Duchess too. But there was no time to mourn. Nia quickly woke Riella, noticing her swollen eyes from crying. After comforting her, Nia hurriedly prepared Riella for the day, sending her to breakfast before emotions could overwhelm her again. The hearty meal helped revitalize Riella, and she felt a little better, ready to face the challenges ahead. At the breakfast table, a pile of papers was placed before Riella, detailing her newfound inheritance. The lawyers explained that it would be impossible to go through everything at once, so they recommended reading it gradually. Meanwhile, Nia and the butlers had managed to deal with the disgruntled guests, sending them away after the will was read. But for Riella, the real challenge had just begun. The inheritance wasn't just limited to the mansion. It included wheat fields, farms with livestock, and the vast surrounding territory. There were also jewels, money, and magical stones. The sheer scale of it all was overwhelming, and the lawyer grew exhausted just reading through it. Riella, feeling the weight of the responsibility, hesitantly raised her hand. "Is it possible to refuse all of this?" The lawyers, visibly disheartened by her question, explained that while it was possible, refusing the inheritance would have serious consequences. It would go to the state, and many people would lose their livelihoods. Moreover, the annual event that the Duchess had financed would be cancelled, affecting countless people. Riella, now deeply worried, didn't want to cause such devastation. She had no idea what to do next. Meanwhile, the man continued to read out a list of damages that would occur if Riella refused the inheritance. The girl was terrified by the immense consequences her refusal would have in various areas. Overcome with dread, Riella sank in her chair, prompting the lawyer to pause and attempt to console her, urging her to sign the will so she could officially inherit. Realizing there was no other choice, Riella, through her tears, reluctantly signed the paper. After the lawyers left, Riella fell into despair, not wanting to sign anything. However, she resolved to manage the Duchess's affairs to the best of her ability. Still, she was deeply concerned about how to explain everything to her family. Suddenly, she remembered that the inheritance should have gone to Archduke Haun, not her. Haun was a renowned stonemancer, and his ruthless reputation often made headlines. Riella feared that Han might try to kill her out of jealousy, since she had received everything, even though he was the rightful heir to the stones. Despite her trepidation, she wasn't ready to lose her life. Luckily, Nia noticed Riella's distress and invited her to the greenhouse for a change of scenery. Riella, feeling awkward, as she typically only entered the garden with permission, hesitated before stepping inside. She was startled to see that the flower, a gift from the Duchess, was glowing. The flower's blooming cycle spanned 2 centuries, and its sudden bloom caught Riella off guard. She felt an overwhelming sadness, knowing the Duchess would never see the flower in bloom. With tears welling in her eyes, Riella sat alone in the greenhouse, hoping that crying would provide some relief. Just then, she heard someone enter, and hastily declared that she wasn't crying. To her surprise, it wasn't Nia, but an unfamiliar man standing before her, silently observing her. They both froze, unsure of what to say. Embarrassed, Riella quickly wiped her tears, trying to hide them from the stranger. She remembered Nia's warning that no one was allowed on the estate without permission. Despite this, the man confidently asked who she was, speaking to her as if he were the owner of the manor. The man, having just returned from the front, had gone straight to his brother and reported the end of his affairs. Archduke Han was about to leave when his brother stopped him, insisting that this wasn't part of his plan. The ruler ordered Han to return, as they needed to discuss matters concerning Duchess Hosang's inheritance. Han's brother suggested that Han should visit the Duchess's mansion, as it was possible for the king's representative to inspect the will without the heir's consent. Han, feeling satisfied with the official permission, headed toward the mansion, burning with anger over the will. He believed that Riella had deceived the ailing Duchess and somehow managed to inherit everything. However, Han couldn't understand why the Duchess's servants had been so naive. Suddenly, Han heard crying, and his suspicion grew. He frowned, thinking he couldn't believe it was Riella. But when he saw a girl sitting on the ground, her face covered in tears, he was momentarily taken aback by her appearance. Despite his discomfort, he couldn't shake the strong feeling that struck him, though he couldn't yet comprehend what it was. Han asked who the girl was, but Riella, still embarrassed, noticed the arrogance in his tone. Although it was their first encounter, she felt no fear, as she now had a right to stand her ground among the aristocracy. Before she could respond, Nia rushed into the greenhouse and shouted for Riella to move away from the stranger. Riella, surprised by his actions, asked how he could see the glow of the flower. Confused by her question, Han turned toward her, and Nia, filled with hatred for Han, confronted him. Sparks flew between them, but Riella suddenly recalled that both Nia and Han could see the flower's light. Excited, she asked the stranger his name. He introduced himself with a hint of annoyance. "I am Archduke Han Arrol Pendragon." Riella, terrified, broke into a cold sweat, recalling the ruthless rumors about him. Nia, furious at Han's proximity to Riella, made a move to strike him. Before she could, Han quickly grabbed Riella's hand, pulling her close to shield her from the potential attack. Riella, stunned by the sudden embrace, blushed but struggled to free herself. Despite her attempts to escape, Han held on tightly, worried that Nia's magic might harm her. Nia, seeing what was happening, considered attacking Han, but Han coolly stated that he would deal with her first and then talk to Riella. This declaration shocked Riella, and she feared for Nia's safety. As Han prepared to cast a spell, Riella, desperate to stop him, pushed him with all her might. But Han, unshaken, remained focused on his magic. In a split second, Riella grabbed the only thing Han cared about, the glowing flower, and threw it at him. The pot shattered. and Han lost his concentration, causing his spell to dissipate. Riella rushed to Nia's side, checking if she was okay. Nia, trying to reassure her, stopped mid-sentence when she saw Riella's face. A small but noticeable scratch marred the girl's skin, making Nia panic and call out her name in alarm. Meanwhile, Han, stunned by the events, realized that Riella had inherited everything from the late Duchess. Both girls were shaken, but Han struggled to believe that Riella, of all people, was the one to receive such an inheritance. Meanwhile, the girl touched the wound on her face with her fingers and looked at her hand, noticing the blood. Han wanted to apologize and explain everything, but Riella screamed at him to stay away. Stubbornly and with great resolve, she declared that he should never come near Nia, even though she herself was bleeding. Riella then turned to her assistant, inspecting her closely for any injuries. Thankfully, Nia was unharmed. Han, seething with fury, was well aware that Nia wasn't just an ordinary assistant, but a dragon in disguise. At that moment, the voices of servants were heard outside the door. Hugging her assistant, Riella cried out loudly for help. The Archduke was shocked by Riella's behavior, as she stood still and did absolutely nothing while screaming for assistance. The servants rushed into the greenhouse, fully prepared for a confrontation. Upon seeing their mistress and assistant kneeling before Han, they were puzzled. Nia immediately sprang into action, declaring that the Archduke had attacked them. This accusation alarmed the servants, who were concerned for their new mistress's safety. Riella, trying to calm the situation, reassured them that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. However, when the servants noticed the blood on her face, they became enraged and turned toward Han, demanding an explanation. To Han's surprise, the man who had fought dragons without fear began to retreat under the pressure of an ordinary assistant. Meanwhile, Neo quickly took Riella into a room to heal her wound using the magic of stones. As they closed the greenhouse door behind them, Neo turned back to Han and stuck her tongue out at him, mocking his predicament. Later, Han found himself sitting in front of Riella's lawyers, forced to listen to their reprimands. They informed him that his actions had almost resulted in a serious offence by overstepping his authority as an inspector, which was unacceptable. Han only half listened, his mind preoccupied with Riella's condition. In the middle of the lawyer's next sentence, Han snapped out of his thoughts and asked what they were discussing. The lawyers, with a sigh, explained that Riella wasn't seriously hurt. Han breathed a sigh of relief, but the lawyers were frustrated, believing that he should have apologized properly. Despite their reproaches, Han remained composed and asked to speak with Riella personally, stating that he had come as an inspector. Meanwhile, Riella was seething with anger at Han for harming Nia. Though Nia remained calm, secretly pleased by the situation, she carefully treated Riella's wound. However, Riella was determined not to calm down and insisted on demanding an apology from the Archduke. Nia advised against it, especially for her own sake, as she and Han were in a deep conflict. Remembering something from the past, Nia's mood shifted and she grew quiet. The girl, overwhelmed by emotions, asked Riella for permission to leave the room and ran off. Riella, observing this, realized that Nia's reaction was likely due to Han's presence. Though she had promised herself to speak with Han for the sake of a peaceful future for Nia, she couldn't shake her fear of him. Meanwhile, Nia, having mastered her emotions, made her way to the Archduke's temporary chambers. Though she had no desire to speak with him, this was the final wish of Duchess Hoson. With politeness, Nia knocked on the door before entering the room. Han, standing with his back to her, turned around, and to her surprise he wore an apologetic expression. This only served to irritate Nia even more, as she realized she couldn't leave just yet. Seeing his assistant standing before him, Han's expression shifted to one of anger. Realizing an opportunity, the Archduke prepared to use his stones, but Nia, quick on her feet, found a way to defend herself. For now, Han was forced to refrain from taking drastic action. He clicked his tongue in frustration, calmed the stones, and turned away, asking why Nia had come. Nia, remaining calm, responded without being provoked. She tossed a moonstone to Han, revealing it to be the shadow crystal, which was the only inheritance he had received from Duchess Hoson. Han found it odd that the Duchess had not left any paperwork, but instead had handed him the stone. Curiosity piqued, he quickly realized there must be something more to it, and shook the shadow crystal to activate it. To his surprise, the image of Duchess Hoson began to materialize in front of him. When Han saw her, he was stunned by how much she had aged, remembering her as much younger. Meanwhile, the image of the Duchess created by the crystal began to speak, and Han listened intently. The Duchess expressed her joy at how upset Han seemed over the will, which only fueled his anger. The Archduke began to show his indignation, but the image of Hoson explained that she simply wanted to see him angry. This only made Han more furious as he looked at the taunting message from the already deceased Duchess. After a brief laugh, the image of the Duchess became more serious and moved on to discuss the will. Hoson explained that it was foolish for the Archduke to hope she would willingly bequeath everything to him. Instead, he should have forced her to make a decision in his favour before she met Riella. Without hesitation, the Duchess revealed that Riella had the ability to grow glowing flowers, a fact that astonished Han. However, Nia left the image to explain the rest, as the crystal's duration was running out and they needed to hurry. Hoson continued, recalling how she had devoted her entire life to working with stones, something she had no regrets about. However, when she met Riella, the Duchess fell in love with the child and realized she could pass on much of her own knowledge. That day, Hoson decided that Riella would be the last gem in her collection. The only way to protect her was to leave her all her inheritance. Hon anxiously wondered what would happen if Riella met a malicious stonemancer instead of the Duchess. The Duchess then posed a question that confused Han. Why was she even telling him all of this? She explained that by looking at Nia, she realized neither the assistant nor Han himself could harm Riella. Hoson added that Nia and Han shared one thing in common, which shocked both of them. In unison, the Archduke and the girl expressed their indignation at such a statement, causing the image of the Duchess to smile. Finally, the Duchess told Han to protect the new mistress, adding that it wasn't a request, but something beneficial for him, as his reward would be all of Hosang's stones from her collection. Hearing about the moonstones, Han was surprised, as he had always thought he would never have access to them. The image of the Duchess explained that another page of the will existed, transferring all her stones to the Archduke. This page was in a protected room of stones, guarded by the moonstones themselves. The Duchess warned that the will would self-destruct in 6 months, which was not ideal for Han. The Archduke, worried about how he would obtain the stones, was left deep in thought when the Duchess's image faded away. Nia, eager to leave Han's room, quickly exited, but Riella suddenly appeared before him. She wanted to discuss what had recently happened, but Han, still emotional, wasn't listening. He stood motionless, murmuring to himself. Riella asked what he was doing, but Han, without answering, sharply turned and pressed her against the wall. He declared that he would receive all of Hosang's inheritance, including Riella. After speaking those words, Han wondered why he had said such things out loud. Before he could say anything else, Riella silently turned and walked toward the door, saying nothing. When she reached the door, she opened it, smiling angrily, and politely told Han to leave. Left with no choice, the Archduke complied and left the room. Riella then went to study with Nia, exhausted but determined to learn. During her free moment, she thought back to Han's words, which she considered selfish. However, she couldn't understand why he had restored the flower she threw at him earlier. At first he defended her, then later behaved aggressively, leaving Riella unsure of what to make of him. Suddenly, a maid burst into Riella's room, breathless, only able to say Han's name. Meanwhile, the Archduke was in his mansion, unaware of what was being said about him in Riella's mansion. He recalled the expression on her face when she had said goodbye to him, and unease crept in, though he couldn't understand the reason for his emotions. His thoughts were interrupted when the Queen decided to visit him. Han immediately greeted her politely, kneeling, and she invited him to sit. The Queen, sensing something was troubling the Archduke, asked what was bothering him. Han became embarrassed, not wanting his feelings to be so obvious. The Queen didn't offer immediate advice, but instead took a moment to sip her tea and think. After analysing the situation, the Queen suggested that Han marry Riella. Han was caught off guard and nearly choked at the idea. He didn't understand why he would marry the new mistress of the Hosang mansion. The Queen explained that the girl was beautiful and now had an excellent inheritance, specifically the stones. Ensuring that they remained with Riella was a prudent move. Though Han admitted that the Queen's words made sense, he still resisted the idea of marriage. After some thought, Han realised that the Queen was concerned enough about him that he needed to do something. His mind wandered to a public ball a few years ago when he refused to let anyone get close to him. An assistant had tried to show him some attractive girls, but he hadn't cared. Then, a girl named Steron approached him. She introduced herself as a recent graduate of the Stonemancer exam and was clearly nervous, bowing in front of him. Steron, still embarrassed, asked Han for advice on moonstones. Han sighed but allowed her to speak, causing Steron to beam with happiness. As they spoke, Steron's father watched from the sidelines, pleased by the interaction. A little later, the old man got drunk and began boasting to others that the Archduke and his daughter were getting along well, and their marriage was just around the corner. He was happy even if Han renounced the throne, as it wouldn't affect his grandchildren. Han later heard about these rumours from his faithful assistant, who had grown tired while handling the situation. Han thanked the assistant and from that point on avoided any more balls, preferring to act alone to prevent further misunderstandings.